Hi, welcome back. Dr. Suzanne Mulvihill here, clinical sexologist and orgasmologist, here to give you some more tips and information about some history today about cannabis helping women orgasm. Since it's not new, Viagra for men may have only been around now for the last decade, but you're going to learn pretty quickly that cannabis has been around helping women orgasm for quite some time. Let's take a look. So here we look at cannabis, women, and sex in ancient times. Cannabis was used in ancient India, enhancing tantra sexual practices. That was found in the 70s when this one researcher went out and did research on having this discovery. Medically, also, it was used in obstetrics and gynecology. They used it to help with birthing, and it was used ritually as well in ceremonies, fertility ceremonies. And if we move to the 1930s, in the United States, cannabis became illegal in the 90s. Prior to the 1930s, it was used medicinally. You can see online, for example, old bottles of where images of cannabis being used and prescribed and easily accessed by the public. And there was a gentleman named Harvey Aslinger, which is another whole topic and a story, but in the United States, it became illegal in the 1930s. Even though I will tell you one thing that's very important, it was known as the love weed. That's another topic. So here, cannabis was used in Russia on wedding nights to help ease the pain of penetration. And this information and knowledge was passed down generationally. And culturally, it was a practical women's knowledge, to know that they would mix this chemical, if you will. They would mix this plant and make something that would reduce the pain. Let's just call it the pain, if there was pain during sex on the wedding night of women. Cannabis and sex research really emerged in the 1960s and 1970s. The first such study was by Dr. Eric Good. He published a book called The Marijuana Smokers in 1969, 1970. His research was in 69 and he published the book in 70. And he interviewed like 200 or did surveys for 200 men and women who were using cannabis for sex. Basically, he was the first one who reported that there was anecdotal evidence. It's in his book that a 27-year-old divorcee was able to achieve orgasm only under the influence of marijuana. So he's the first one, having researched cannabis and sex for my PhD, over 1,000 research articles. Maybe I'm up to like 1,500 by this point that I have in a database. He was the first one that I've ever saw that did a research paper that showed that it improved women's orgasm. And then he also said that women were expressing more satisfaction and reporting higher frequency of orgasm. So keep that in mind. We move next to Barbara Lewis. If you research a title of book, I have a copy of this in Italy. It's called The Sexual Power of Marijuana. This book was written in 1970. So Barbara Lewis did a similar study, only she did all interviews. And she was the first to suggest cannabis as treating women's orgasm difficulty. She noted in her book that 4 women reported having learned to have their first orgasm while using cannabis, and that they would later be able to achieve it without, which I have developed theories about that. And that's another topic, the neuroplasticity theory, for example, where the brain, once we learn a new neural pathway, like with using cannabis, then that's why they could orgasm without it. Some, not all, but some. And she also has a whole chapter in her book dedicated to marijuana as therapy and marijuana as treating what was then called frigidity. So frigidity was a topic, kind of a condescending, well, not kind of, it was a condescending term for women. And again, I have more to say about that in another video. But here again, more pioneering research. While this substance was illegal, okay, it was illegal. So let's move on. Expanding to 1970, we have another researcher named Koff who evaluated marijuana and sex as well. And he looked specifically at cannabis dosage. Now, mind you, cannabis was much weaker back in the 70s than it is today. So he would talk about people smoking whole joints, where today, for me, I'm a one-hit kind of girl, right? Like one hit, I'm good. Like I have a very sensitive system and it took me a while to learn that, but I'm a one-hit kind of girl. So he found that while some women would experience multi-orgasm, only on cannabis. Some would also be situationally non-orgasmic from using cannabis. And they began to evaluate the dosage factor, that dosage played a role in the impact of cannabis on sexual functioning. Then we moved to 79, and Dolly, now he's another interesting fellow. Dolly was the first in a scientific study to talk about the therapeutic potential of cannabis treating sexual disorders, not just for women, but for men too. So while we had Barbara Lewis, right, in 1970 doing a whole chapter, she didn't do a peer-reviewed research study. Her research was published in a book. Dolly's was a published research study that was peer-reviewed, and he made this implication that it needs to be looked at for treating sexual disorders. And he also talked about increasing sexual pleasures and sensations, greater intensity of orgasm, so you can begin to see this theme happening already in just 10 years of research from 69 to 79. And then we move forward to research developments in 82 and 84. We had Hallekas and Weller. They were two researchers who did two research papers on the same group of people, reported frequent users seeking cannabis specifically for sexual enjoyment, and that about 60% of the females reporting enhanced orgasm quality, and that more users were reporting increased number and ability to orgasms. Here it is. This is 40 years ago. The research gap. No research between 1984 and 2016 on cannabis and sex. Niento, nothing. We had those 40 years of lost decades. We had political climates with the war on drugs. We had cultural taboos, female sexuality remaining underfunded. Obviously, it's difficult to do cannabis research now, because it's still illegal on a federal level. The renaissance of research came in 2016 with a study by Palomar. He was looking at alcohol and cannabis, the impacts of alcohol and cannabis, which you don't have such a clean study when you're looking at, okay, what is it on alcohol? What is it on cannabis? But he did find that some users were reporting magnified orgasms with cannabis, more intense and longer orgasms. And then again here, some participants couldn't orgasm with cannabis, lack of focus, more than likely dosage has an impact on that. And males had reported, and this has shown up in studies, a number of studies, that some took longer to achieve orgasm. So, and the mindset actually obviously played a role. Then we have a study 3 years later by Dr. Becky Lynn in 2019. She is an obstetrician and gynecologist. I think she's just a gynecologist actually in St. Louis. And the reason she did this study, and she's reported this also on some podcasts that she's given, is because women, her clients, would come to her patients, and say, you wouldn't believe it, doctor, but I'm having more sex and more orgasms and better sex with cannabis. So she conducted a study in her practice and found that women who use cannabis more frequently were twice as likely to report orgasm satisfaction. Women who were more frequent users were more likely to experience orgasm than non-users. So this was a research milestone, and there are many research articles about Dr. Becky Lynn's research. So then we have a study, Weeb and Just, this was out of Canada, who were looking again at the implications of cannabis on sex. And they did this study in 2019. We had increased orgasm frequency, enhanced ability to experience orgasm, easier orgasm. And they also researched people who expressed orgasm difficulty. This was the first study that actually talked about orgasm difficulty, and reporting that the majority of people who said they had orgasm difficulty found it was easier to orgasm with cannabis. Up to Kasman's research in 2020, he did a study. He's out of California, and his study looked at what was called the Female Sexual Function Index, which evaluates the 5 domains of sexual functioning: arousal, desire, orgasm, pain, and lubrication. And what was key in his research was that he found that for each increase, each step up of cannabis use frequency, so for example, if a woman uses it once a week, and then he looked at frequency more than twice a week, each woman that increased their frequency decreased sexual dysfunction by 21%. And orgasm was statistically significant, meaning it was a study that showed that more frequent use, better orgasm, more likely to orgasm, improved sexual functioning. It was significant. And his medical implication was there's therapeutic value here in looking at cannabis as a treatment for sexual issues. When is it going to happen, right? Like, when is it going to happen? Okay, so move up to 2023. We have Amanda Moser, who I've had as a guest recently on the Orgasm Hour podcast. You'll see how 811 people talked about orgasm difficulty, orgasm, and using cannabis in sex. So her research, 70% reported increased orgasm experiences, cannabis enhancing both desire and orgasm. Also multi-orgasm. And we heard this in 1974, as I just reported earlier with cough, that women were having more multi-orgasm. 40% of women experienced increased orgasms, more orgasms when they were using cannabis. And again, talked about the treatment implications, that it's treatment and policy. 2024, and we had two studies in 2024 that came out. One of them was mine and Dr. Tischler and I, Dr. Jordan Tischler. This was my dissertation research that we published in a peer-reviewed journal. It took a year to get it published, reporting that 72%, let's just say the majority of women who had orgasm difficulty. So ours was the first study that dichotomized women with and without orgasm difficulty. We asked them, did you have a difficulty during sex, orgasm? Partnered sex, so specifically during partnered sex, because a lot of women can orgasm during masturbation, but not during partnered sex. So these were the results. There was increased orgasm frequency, increased orgasm ease, and while it's not on this slide, there was also increased orgasm satisfaction. And then a study out of the UK came out later at the end of the year in December. Bradbury, her study was on women who had what was called acquired sexual dysfunction, meaning these were 6-month post-gynecological cancer patients, and they were using cannabis suppositories. So she did the first randomized controlled trial, meaning there was a control group that didn't use any THC in their suppositories, so that you can get, it's called the gold standard when you do a study with a randomized controlled trial. That's the cream of the crop. And you can tell that I haven't mentioned that until now because there hasn't been one randomized controlled trial until now. And her study showed improvement, meaning it wasn't by chance that cannabis was helping them have improved sexual function, including orgasm function. And mindful use also played a significant role in her study, that they were using the cannabis mindfully. We'll take a look here at the policy evolution. So some of you may know that I launched what's called the Women's Cannabis Project. And this cannabis project is to help female orgasm difficulty/disorder become a condition of treatment for medical cannabis in U.S. states and countries worldwide. And Connecticut is the first state that actually put female orgasm difficulty disorder on their list of qualifying conditions. So if you live in Connecticut, you can go and see a doctor and get a prescription, be under the care of a doctor while you learn to orgasm. So you don't take too much, like the Goldilocks effect, right? You find the right amount with a professional. And I highly recommend that. Many women try to do it on their own and they take too much the first time and they don't take enough and then they give up. So if you're serious about your orgasm, I highly recommend getting a medical prescription for it. Illinois was the second state that approved it just earlier this year. And this is 2025. And New Mexico, we're waiting for theirs. It's a national movement. 11 states have been petitioned. A number of them have denied it. So we're working with all the policy implications on that. You can go to womenscp.org, stands for Women's Cannabis Project, and you can see which states have been petitioned. And if you want to get involved, sign up. And really, that's the end. I hope that you gain some knowledge and some wisdom and some confidence more than anything. You know, women talk to me about how they don't really want to use cannabis. And my recommendation is, yeah, like men use Viagra. They don't have a problem with using Viagra. Like, use the cannabis. You can follow me for more tips. Follow me to get confidence. And let's get you orgasmic, ladies. Better orgasms, more frequent, and more pleasurable. Thank you for joining me today.